Hi, this is Chuck at Last Discovery Podcast at the junction of faith and recovery. Tonight's podcast going to be about good stuff, bad stuff. That's what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the things that I consider personally good stuff. In other words, the ingredients that make good recovery programs. I've been around and I've done a lot of different things. So that's what I'm going to do in this podcast and maybe several podcasts. I'm going to talk about the good stuff and the bad stuff. Right now I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that I consider that make a really good group. And the first thing I want to talk about is small groups. AA is basically, in some meetings, is a small group. It's like they have 12-step meetings, and they have discussion meetings, they have open meetings, closed meetings. But the basic thing is it's all about talking. And I think that the important thing is the fact that in a recovery group, people get to talk and people listen. That's critical. If you don't work those small groups out well and keep things in order, then it's going to be very difficult for any group to prosper because there needs to be discussion. I mean, I know in AA there's certain groups that are, you just walk in, you listen, and you leave. Generally speaking, they aren't as effective as some sort of talking about common topic. And a lot of AA meetings are that way. I mean, they do have speaker meetings where you can sit down, listen, and you don't have to talk to people. But what you really need is you need to be able to listen to people. And so a small group is really a key part to that. Another thing that's really important is an orderly emphasis on what's important and not important. You know, what's important? What's not important? You know, and it's a sort of a hierarchy of consider this. You know, that's important. And there has to be an agreement about what's important and what's not important. That's another thing. I mean, there has to be agreement about the important stuff and the unimportant stuff and the hierarchy of which is important and which isn't. That's critically important in having agreement. So it's not like a mishmash of things. It's what's important and what isn't. In AA, and there's a common agreement about that. There's not a lot of yelling around and stuff. Everybody sort of agrees what's important. In AA, it's like, you know, sobriety. Our primary purpose is to stay sober, help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. It's simple and it's concise, and this is what you measure everything to. This is the purpose. Also, there's a understanding of who we are in the group. What is the definition of the person? AA, it's like, you know, all you need is a desire to stay sober. You know, that's the only requirement is a desire to stay sober, to stay away from a drink. That's important for a good group. There needs to be understanding of the hierarchy of importance and not too much. You know, they say keep it simple, stupid. Well, keep it simple, stupid is, you know, keeping the main thing the main thing. That's important. Keep the main thing the main thing. You know, that's a sign of a good group. If they can keep their focus narrow and keep the main thing the main thing, then they have a very good chance of helping people. Because people come for the main thing. They don't come for the ancillary stuff. They depend on the fact that the group will keep the main thing the main thing. What else is important? I think it's important that a group have a common understanding of issues, to keep all the politicking down. Keep it simple. Purpose to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. Sort of democratic way of government. In other words, no bosses. There are just the final decision is made by group conscience, and they know what that means. They know that if things are working right, the way things work is the way everybody's settled on them working. You don't have one guy running the show. You have a whole bunch of people in some sort of agreement. There's agreement, there's a background. That's what's important. A common understanding. And AA worked very hard at getting that to happen. They worked extremely hard. And they kept it simple. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. Period. The groups are run by common group agreement, the group conscience, which is not necessarily, one guy enforcing stuff on a bunch of people. It is legitimately they work until they can get some sort of agreement on things. And if they can't get agreement, they just don't go there. Pretty strict about the way they run the politics. And it shows. It shows exactly how they do it. That's another good ingredient. A good understanding of what they're about. A good, simple understanding of how they're going to go about it. Another thing is that they communicate well with the least of these. In other words, they run the place as if the most important person in the room is the person that is just coming around. They'd want the meeting to function to bring hope to people individually who are outside their understanding. The good groups are not like us and then there's them. There's no thems in good groups. There's people that they define as members. Good groups define the members fairly clearly. In AA, it's the requirement for members is a desire to stay sober. Not that you are sober, but a desire to stay sober. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. That's as simple as it gets. When that kind of thing gets blurred, then and the groups really can't tell you exactly what they're about. They can't, in a sentence, tell you what they're about. That's a problem. That is a problem. So you need a simple way of saying who's there, who belongs, and what we're about. And keep it simple. And another key essential is to, keep the main thing, not wander off. AA did that well. Well, it was one of their principles. The main thing's the main thing. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Period. A lot of other groups, there is like a whole laundry list of complicated things and traps you can run into. In other words, the group might be, we are a church group and therefore we are beholden to the church that we're having the meeting in to try to stay within the bounds of the church doctrine or whatever it is. That's a problem. It's the primary purpose to stay in step with the church, or is the primary purpose to help people as they return to perhaps find Jesus or find help. So that's important. Everybody in the group understands what. And one of the final things is I think that group has to have a common understanding of where they're going and who's going with them. AA says, desire to stay sober. It's important that people understand just what it is that defines them as a person who would be talking about being an attending member of that group. In AA, it's simple. They set it down. They stay sober or try to stay sober. Churches in recovery don't necessarily do that. I think their primary purpose is to support the church. That gets complicated because sometimes the way the church practices it makes it really hard to keep the focus on the people themselves, because it's like the church becomes an ancillary member of the thing. That you end up with a problem where you have a recovery group where the church isn't really recovery. They are all about getting members or something like that. But you're a church, and so therefore you need to stay in lockstep with the church. And a lot of times that makes for a bad group, because a lot of times, a lot of that stuff is just, it falls into the wayside. It's just, so that's the key thing. You gotta have focus on the one thing that's important. So a good group has a way to make people feel that they are one with the group. In other words, we're agreeing with the group. That's sometimes complicated, but it's fairly easy. Again, what's the main thing? What's the main focus you're trying to do? Is the main focus turning everybody that walks in the doors into similar people, and some of the people that don't stay as members, that don't attend? What's the requirement for membership? What's the requirement to be sort of accepted? AA says try to stop drinking. The church, it gets to be complicated. It gets to be complicated because they don't want the desire to stop drinking as being the primary thing, because that's not what they're about. So it's what's the main thing? What's the main thing? The main thing is the main thing. What's that? Agree on a common denominator between them and their idea of where they are going with the group. And a lot of times the church is not that focused enough, because it really doesn't know where it's going. So I think that something in the line of we're in agreement that we will travel one day at a time to what we'd call home. I mean, churches do that, it's like we're just pilgrims passing through. We're all headed to the kingdom. So that's a good thing for church recovery groups, to define themselves as people reaching out to those who are already by Jesus because they go to a church. But what's that mean? So it's definitions of people when they come are important, so people can get together and say, yes, I agree with that. I agree that, anybody that's in the group sort of understands that they're all headed in the right direction. In AA, it's sobriety. In the church, theoretically, it's heaven. Everybody is heaven bound. In the old days, it was pilgrim. Pilgrim marched into the promised land. I think that you'd have to establish Christian recovery groups. You have to establish some sort of joint idea of where we're going in the future, and that's something that you can't let go of. You can't let go of that. There's a need for something like that. You have to have a clear focus of direction, a clear focus of, where you're going and what you believe and the foundation for it. You have to take care of the doctrinal thing with religious type of things. You've got to take care of the doctrinal thing right up for and describe it and talk about it. Be able to say, this is what people in this group believe and are about. I mean, it could be as simple as we are pilgrims on the way home. And home is understood to be Jesus. But we're pilgrims. That it's not about being a pilgrim, it's about the finished product. It's about sanctification. It's about presenting everybody that talks, as a person who's on a journey. The destination is obviously heaven. The destination is belonging together in the kingdom. A massive amount of difference between, faith and recovery. Because I think for faith groups to prosper, they have to say, this is what we're about. This is who I am and this is what I do. I want to do this over and over again. Would you like to join? So that you can, go learn about what you're about. I think that's important. Who are we? What do we believe? What are the essentials and what are the negotiables? That's important. So everybody understands, what's important. Sort of the essentials of a good group. A direction to go, an understanding of who belongs, and finally, a common understanding of who the abiding authority is. In AA, it's the group conscience as guided by God. In the church, it is Jesus who guides by the Holy Spirit. Can't be any argument about that. If you're gonna play the game, you got to play the game and let people know that this is the way we are. This is where we're at. Okay, this is Chuck at Lazarus Recovery Podcast at the junction of faith and recovery. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's important that we get the basics right. Small group thing that we talk together, we communicate well together. We have a foundation of common understanding of beliefs and goals, that we know where we're going, we know who we are, we have a good, strong identity of who we are in the group, and we have a good identity of what the group is about and what it believes and doesn't believe. So this is Chuck at Lazarus Recovery Podcast, Junction of Faith and Recovery. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.